All right. Well, thanks everyone for hopping in and joining us today on a Friday, as we were saying. This is the Capital Connection webinar series hosted by the Michigan Environmental Council, where we connect you with some of the latest environmental developments in the state and the movers and shakers that are helping making them happen. I'm Bo Brockett. I'm the communications coordinator for the Michigan Environmental Council. If you've attended the program before, you may notice that this is a different face talking at you. Conan Smith, our president and CEO, is the usual host, but as we were talking, we wanted to really expand out this webinar, bring in more folks, give you more webinar topics. And in order to do that, Conan and I are now going to be kind of splitting the hosting roles going forward. So super excited to be with you all today. And I'm super excited today to also be joined by Karen O'Brien from the Michigan Recycling Coalition. Karen is the executive director of that organization, which is an environmental council member group. And we're here today to talk about the state of recycling in Michigan. So Karen, thanks so much for being here today.
Bo, thanks for having me. I'm happy to talk about recycling. It's always a good day for recycling.
Yeah, definitely. So, and from what a few days ago, we were talking ahead of this webinar, and you mentioned that we're at a pretty opportune moment for recycling in Michigan. But before we get into that, would you mind sharing a little bit about yourself and your organization so folks can get a sense of who you are and what they do if they aren't familiar with you?
Sure. The Michigan Recycling Coalition has been around since about 1982. We had our 40th annual conference this year. We really are a kind of trade association for recycling professionals, but also kind of the state's recycling advocate. So we've been working in front of and behind the scenes for years to bring recycling into the fore in Michigan. And we continue to do that work, and it's picking up some speed now, and we're happy for that.
Yeah, that's great. And again, as you mentioned earlier, that we're at a very kind of opportune moment for recycling in Michigan. Would you mind sharing a bit about like the state of recycling at this moment?
Yeah. Back in 2008, we, kind of the big thinkers around recycling decided that what recycling in Michigan really needed was funding. And so we set ourselves to the task of figuring out how to bring funding to recycling. And we were the kind of the key stakeholder in some legislation that was passed back in 2018. Which provides ongoing funding for recycling on an annual basis. This was part of a larger package. $65 million was earmarked on an ongoing annual basis. It's the first kind of environmental funding that is annual and ongoing, really ever delivered in Michigan. So it was quite significant for its time, but 45 million of that is to clean up contaminated sites, and 24 million of that is really for materials management, waste management, oversight, and programming. And so now we've had about 4 years then to begin to put programs and kind of supportive enabling of programming in place to level up recycling in Michigan. There's a long way to go, but we've made significant progress. And I think that's why we're seeing a lot of excitement about recycling right now.
That's great. And I'm very excited to get into some of those details about what's ahead and what's happening right now here in the moment. But before we get into that, would you maybe mind giving us a bit of like, I guess, historical context in a sense? Like where are we at right now in recycling that kind of caused that funding to happen in the first place? What's kind of prompted us to really turn our eyes toward recycling, composting opportunities and to invest in them?
Yeah, and I'll start from way back because, back in the 70s, Michigan's bottle bill was really kind of a significant place. And then there was also a lot of activity around kind of landfill development, and the fact that at that time, we were starting to fill up our landfills. And so the agenda around recycling and materials management really developed out of this concern that we wouldn't have enough disposal capacity, and because we started seeing litter around our streets and rivers, and so a lot of the policies now 50 years ago were really based on some of the problems we had back then. And so, beginning to collect that material in programs in the 70s really helped us to see that there's value there. There are, manufacturers that need that material. And then over the course of the development of these programs, we really became much better versed in understanding the value of materials that we pay to dispose of in our landfills every day. And if we could divert those materials in a real meaningful way, not only could we reduce our dependence on landfills because they are, they will be a burden on our municipalities that host them forever. And if we can harness recycling, then we can also harness the economic benefits recycling brings. So, on this side, our average recycling rate in the country is about 34%. In Michigan, we're about 18%. So there's a long way we need to make up, and there's economic benefits in doing that. If we were to reach a 45% recycling goal, then these economic benefits come into play because you frankly need people to collect the material, to consolidate and bale the material, and then send it off to market. And then once you, put it out, once you captured this material and then put it back into kind of productive use, then you're generating more economic activity in adding value to that material. So there's all kinds of economic benefits that even rival Michigan's tourism industry if we can better use the materials already circulating in our economy. So that's what we're talking about.
Wow, that's amazing to think about, knowing how big our recreation industry is,
Yes.
billions of dollars each year. And this slide you shared with me a little while ago, that probably, to me, this seems to encapsulate the situation really well. We're only capturing 18% of our stream of recyclable materials, compostable materials, but there's really so much more potential out there right now for us.
Really what this tells me is that there's literally 70% of the materials we throw away every day. If we had the kind of comprehensive recycling programs we're working toward, we could capture and use 70% of our materials. We only have a goal of 45% because we know it's hard to get there, and it's going to require capital investment, and it's going to require people turning their attention to this. But there's, climate benefits to doing that. If you're already using materials circulating in the economy, then you don't have to invest in virgin extraction of materials and, transporting those across the world to be turned back into, some kind of form of plastic. So, this is really important. There's a lot we can do if we have the kind of right programs and services in place.
That's great. And that's a great perspective. When I think about the environmental benefits of recycling, I tend to think about how it diverts waste out of landfills, right? And there's less of a chance of pollution, of litter. But you're right. There's actually a climate benefit too that I've never thought of too heavily before. That's great to hear the myriad benefits happening all at once.
Yeah. There's a wide variety of benefits. Not only the economic value of the materials itself, and putting people to work doing something new with those materials, but it's like the stuff we don't have to do because we're putting these materials to better use.
Yes. Yeah, definitely so.
So this, slide shows kind of EPA data, and it's a little bit frightening because what the slide shows is that on a per capita, per person basis by state, in Michigan, we dispose of more waste per person than any other state. But I need to explain it a little bit because it's not necessarily because on an individual basis we're wasting more. It's really because of almost a quarter of the waste disposed in Michigan comes from out of state. And it comes from out of state because our landfill costs are low, and it comes out of country because it's much cheaper to dispose of this material in Michigan than it is everywhere else. So on a per capita basis, they're looking at, the full amount of waste that we dispose here, whether or not we're generating that. And so, what we're trying to do is work on the policies, change the underlying policies so that we're not so attractive to the waste that's generated outside of Michigan.
That's great. And that seems like a perfect segue into maybe one of those first big opportunities that's happening right now in Michigan when it comes to boosting recycling rates, which is, I think, what we've called the Part 115 bill package. Would you mind sharing a bit about what that is and what it can do for us as a state?
Yeah, so Part 115, which is the kind of nickname, or at least it's the part of the Natural Resources and Environmental Protection Act in Michigan that governs solid waste. And the crux of this policy, it requires each county in Michigan to demonstrate that they have at least 5.5 years of disposal capacity, whether that is in landfills in their own county, or if it's arrangement with other counties that have landfills to take their waste. They've got to demonstrate that they have that, because we want to be responsible for the waste. The federal government says we need to be responsible for our waste. The challenge of that is that if counties can't demonstrate that they have 5.5 years of disposal capacity or more, then they've got to make way for the development of disposal capacity. And so the result of that policy is we've really enabled the development of landfill capacity beyond our needs. And that's why the cost of landfilling is relatively low compared to our neighbors, and why we attract trash to this state. That's what we're trying to change. So Part 115, we've really talked about, or we've worked with a large stakeholder group over a number of years to try to move this this policy stance from one of assuring disposal capacity to assuring capacity to manage materials more sustainably by including recycling and composting and other materials management methodologies, and to assure that those facilities can be cited, that those facilities, that we're properly identifying where those facilities are needed, and then we're providing the necessary funding to plan for that activity. And then we have grant dollars to put in place the infrastructure that's needed to level up recycling services and infrastructure in Michigan.
Noted. So this bill package, in a sense, and correct me if I'm wrong, but is essentially kind of helping Michigan move from maybe more of a landfill first approach to one that's that brings in recycling and composting and other ways of reusing materials into the picture.
That's exactly right. We're not talking about solid waste disposal anymore. We're talking about materials management now. And this package of bills, it's a huge package, an 8-bill package that the House of Representatives last year. It is sitting in a Senate committee, the Senate Regulatory Reform Committee. If something is not passed or done by December 31st, we have to go back to the drawing board and figure out what we need to do. So, it's really imperative, I think, that we right the policy wrongs of the past and we do it now. So, if you have a line to your senator or feel like doing some advocacy today, call your senator and ask them what's happening with Part 115, or what are we doing about modernizing Michigan's solid waste laws so that we can better manage the materials that we're paying to throw away that have value.
Yeah. And for those that are watching live, I'll be sure to send you all an email after this webinar concludes, not only with the recording of the webinar itself, but maybe we'll also include some of those basic steps folks can take to reach out and help get this legislation moving.
That's great.
And it's a shame too, not only because of all the goodness that bill package brings, but it has bipartisan support. It passed with a pretty strong bipartisan support and is now stuck, which it really is a shame.
It's really stuck, and we're not sure why. The only thing I can chalk it up to at this point is politics. And, if we have any impact on politics, your average Joe, it's about calling and letting our senators know what we think and what we desire. Yeah,
definitely so. And do you have a pulse of sorts of where things could head? I know this is a lame duck session, meaning that there could be a change in the executive branch. There will be a new legislature by 2023. Do you feel like that could have any sort of play in how this stuff moves along?
It's all going to to come into the calculation, but at this point, one person, the chair of the Regulatory Reform Committee, Senator Eric Nesbitt, is kind of in control, and he hasn't shared with us what his plans are. We're asking actively, but he hasn't shared those plans with us, so we hope. Our big job now is to figure out, what happens in the future, or how we maybe break this big package into smaller pieces that we try to successively move through the system, in the next session.
Noted. And if you don't mind, I'd like to take a little time talking about some of the potential impacts that this legislation could bring on the environment, on the people. I know I've kind of moved around Michigan over the years, and from the east side of the state to southern Michigan in the rural, in rural towns, and then now in Lansing. And I've kind of noticed two refrains when it comes to me recycling and composting. The first is that not all recycling facilities in different places will take the same sorts of materials that are marked as recyclable. And then two, not all places have recycling still, in terms of communities themselves, but also, I've lived in apartments, and not all apartments have that curbside recycling program in place. Do you feel like, will this sort of legislation address those issues? Well, essentially, will this legislation allow not only more people to take part in the process, but then also allow them to recycle more materials, maybe 20, 30 years down the line?
Yeah, Michigan's recycling system really grew up because we had communities and private sector businesses that, said either this is important to us and we need to offer these services, or, hey, this is a way we can make money. Let's, start to do this. And so all of these programs kind of grew up independently of one another. And, the state didn't have kind of any overarching plan or leadership or guidance for any of these programs. And so what we're hoping is that now with this change in legislation, that we hope to establish benchmark recycling standards. And that really means, communities over 5,000 would be encouraged and incentivized to provide curbside recycling services. And communities under 5,000 would be encouraged and incentivized to provide drop-off recycling services. So that when these services are, as you indicate, they're different, and some places they don't exist, but let's get them up to some kind of standard where everybody's got access to opportunities. Mm-hmm. When you talk about, different material being taken at different material being taken by different material recovery facilities or recycling plants, that's really a function of the end market, that they are taking your single stream recyclables all in one bin. They're separating that stuff out in a MRF, or material recovery facility, and then they're baling or consolidating that material to send it off to market. Mm-hmm. Your milk cartons, for example, or your aseptic packages in Michigan will generally go to a Michigan company called Great Lakes Tissue. Those get turned into commercial toilet paper. There are places in the Great Lakes that don't have ready access to this market that we have to turn cartons into something, and so they likely don't collect cartons. So, all of these programs are really grow and develop based on the resources that they have. But I'll speak really quickly to the slide that's up, and that is the U of M Center for Local, State, and Urban Policy does this a study every year, different topics every year, but they get a really great return rate, 70% or above, from local officials around the state. And this year's, it was about recycling, and we learned a whole lot about attitudes about recycling. But this one really says that, for the most part, somewhat or very important, recycling is deemed as an important service across the state. And it's one that I think people are expecting. It's a part of placemaking. We all expect it. And recycling is a touchstone. It's something that we can all do wherever we work, play, and live to make our world a better place, to reduce our waste, to do something more productive with that material. And our local officials know it. And so it is up to us to kind of hold them and support them in making the choices and having the political will to actually help put these programs in place.
Yeah, that's great. And I know that the color scheme is can be a little bit tough on this slide. So yeah, just to reiterate what you said, it looks like 80% to 90% of people are for recycling in their local communities. That's a huge number. And I'd imagine that the local officials recognize that and want to act on that too, if they had the means to, which from what it seems, this bill package will help allow them to do.
Yeah, and if I could make a point right here, when you think about services, our curbside waste services, we pay for a service that collects our waste at the curb and takes it to the landfill. We pay for that service. And we should expect to pay for the service of having our recyclables picked up and then taken to, the recycling center or the material recovery facility. The real difference comes in what happens at both of those places. If we're paying to have it taken to the landfill, then we're having to pay to watch that landfill into perpetuity, because landfills will eventually degrade and can potentially pollute groundwater. There's a lot of these landfills are highly engineered to not let that happen, but they have to be under constant watch to assure that. Whereas if we're paying for that material to go to a recycling facility, then that material is being put back into production and doesn't require kind of constant watch. It doesn't, change our landscape like landfills do.
Yeah, that's great. There's a higher cost for residents for maintaining landfills.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's a great point. I'm watching the time here, and I want to make sure we touch on the other big initiative that's happening in Michigan as well. So if you're all right, maybe we could pivot a little bit to
Sure.
what NextCycle Michigan is and how this sort of program kind of really fits in nicely with this bill package that we've been talking about.
Yeah. So with the funding that was won in 2018, about $15 million of that funding is really earmarked to go out to communities and to Michigan businesses in this in this industry to support the development of the programs and markets and that kind of stuff. And NextCycle Michigan, along with other Eagle grants, NextCycle Michigan is an initiative of the state. And what it's designed to do is to incubate and accelerate kind of big ideas about how we could, put ideas and infrastructure in place to better manage our materials. So there's several different tracks. So we're focused on roads, we're focused on organics, we're focused on intergovernmental and public-private partnerships. We're focused on innovative solutions to our problems, and we're focused on the supply chain. So public sector and private sector programs are apply to become a part of a NextCycle cohort in one of these tracks. And through that process, which takes about 6 months, they are really provided with technical assistance and expertise to move their big idea into kind of a shovel-ready project phase where it can be, where it can attract public or private sector funding to get it off the ground. So what we're really trying to do is leverage the funding that, $15 million or whatever is being put into that particular. We're trying to leverage that funding to bring more funding to Michigan to level up the infrastructure so that we can really provide recycling opportunities to all of the residents across the state. And in doing that, we kind of raise the tides for businesses and commercial entities and even the industry to do more with recycled material.
That's great. And just from hearing that, it sounds to me, and looking at the number of projects that are ongoing or complete already, that the interest is there. People want to take part in this blossoming recycling and composting industry, this just gives them the means to be able to get into that market and really make it happen.
That's exactly right. And, I think we're all aware that there's more federal funding or new federal funding that will kind of start to trickle down to the states for recycling and other kind of environmental and climate change issues. And so even though it took Michigan a long time to get to this place in recycling, because now we are gaining national prominence for what we're doing, we're able to kind of leapfrog over and benefit from kind of what the federal government is doing in a way that other states aren't, because of all the activity that we're engaged in right now and the investment we're ready to make in Michigan.
That's great. And that we actually just had someone ask in the Q&A section whether if we knew of any other recent federal spending bills and how that might impact recycling. Are there any other ways that federal spending might kind of trickle into the recycling industry here?
Oh yeah, there's really funding for market development. There's funding for infrastructure development, that is material recovery facilities and collection sites, and there will be funding for education. And we know that education has kind of been woeful over the past many years because of contamination issues. And I'm sure you've all heard that on the news, that there's contamination issues. But education, we really need to have a really significant investment in education to help people understand what it is we're trying to do and what can go in that recycling bin and what can't. So pay close attention to that folder or that flyer you get about what can go in your bin. Only put that in the bin. Other stuff can be recycled, but it's likely it's got to be recycled in different places in your community.
Yeah, that's great. I wasn't in grade school too long ago, and I remember like having reduce, reuse, recycle, having like those general ethos being kind of ingrained in me. It's just a little bit matter of putting those into practice a little bit better, and that seems to be where that education component comes in.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We've got a whole generation of people that have been brought up on that we, I think, have a responsibility to serve and continue on with.
That's great. And, again, looking at the time here, I know we're just about out, but I want to ask you one last question to get us thinking a bit more about the future, if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
If NextCycle Michigan continues to ramp up its funding, to continue to see great innovative programs through, if this bill package we talked about that would kind of rewrite our waste system ends up passing, where do you see Michigan? What do you see Michigan looking like? Its communities, its environment looking like a few years down the line, or maybe a few decades down the line?
Yeah, my goal is that kind of recycling and organic waste services, yard waste, food waste, are really on par with waste services. And so if Part 115 passes, it would mean that every county in Michigan has to have a conversation with its municipalities and with its private sector service providers to figure out what it really needs to put in place to deliver these services and to capture these materials. And once they do that and we have that volume, we'll be able to attract businesses that want to use that. So I see that we'll have recycling opportunities for all residents in Michigan, and we'll have more business opportunities here in Michigan based on the materials that we're recovering. So there's a lot to be gained from these changes.
That's great. And I know that there are a few opportunities ahead for people to take part. We talked about the Part 115, calling your legislator, emailing them, and there's a few others, like write down the line in the next few weeks. Would you mind quickly?
Yeah, I think you might have a slide about our compost tour. But we are hosting a great Michigan compost tour next week. We've identified, I think, 11 or 12 different sites around the state, compost sites, and they've identified, and if you can put the the link to the PDF in the chat to give more information. They're opening their sites for a couple hours next week, so you can learn about the composting process. If there's compost, we need to better manage our organic waste, because if we can, we basically turn it back into soil, and we can amend soils, and we can sequester carbon, and we can do a whole lot of good stuff with compost. And so this is our attempt to bring more people in to understand what that means and what that looks like. So I encourage you all to check out your local compost site. If you can't get there next week, I would reach out to them and just learn as much as you can. There's a lot to be gained there. And then on October 6th and 7th, we are hosting what we call Fall into Recycling. It'll be a 2-day event, and it's Fall into Recycling Season of Innovation. We will be showcasing 25 different NextCycle teams who will show you, who will kind of make a pitch about their big project to attract investors, to attract interest. But those pitches will also provide really good opportunities to learn about all of the different developments that are happening in Michigan, and they're really significant, and they're really small and more meaningful for the local economies, but they're all have their they can all serve as models about what we can do in the future. So I think the chat, that information's in the chat as well if you're interested in that event and learning about investment in recycling. So thanks for the opportunity to share those.
Of course, yeah. And again, to all the folks listening, we'll include those links and a little bit more information about them in a follow-up email. Also, in that follow-up email, you'll get a recording of this webinar too, and any unanswered questions we weren't able to get to in time. But I know we started a little late and are finishing up a little bit late. So Karen, thank you so much for taking that extra time today to sit down and talk with us about the state of recycling.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, and keep on recycling.
Yes, yeah, we'll do. And thank you to all the audience members for taking some time out of their Fridays too. It really means a lot that you're here for us. And I want to give a final shout out to our sponsors for the Capital Connection webinar series, the Dobsons and CalSec Incorporated. So thanks everyone, and we'll see you soon.